What's good, big dogs? Welcome back into another episode here on Fridays with myself. My name is Adam on the BDGE Dynasty channel. As you can see, the beard ain't back yet. Just a little bit of stubble, but we're getting there. Now, whether you can take me serious or not with this face, I don't really know what to tell you because we're going right back to where we started, where all the chaos was. We appreciate everybody tapping in on the live stream. Nick speechless for a ton of time after the Falcons selected Michael Penix Jr. And right now, everybody's really scared to kind of touch this topic in Dynasty. Nobody wants to draft him apparently either. It's time to talk about it. It's time to get right into the weeds and really dig into what is going on with this situation in Atlanta. What can we actionably do? What can we look at as far as historical data? What can we look at with the contract situation Kirk Cousins actually has? And thinking and keeping in mind the fact that Michael Penix was drafted by this team and organization after they gave Kirk Cousins the contract, and remembering that that is the most recent piece of information that we have. What's realistic to expect as a range of outcomes for Michael Penix to actually step on the field? Michael Penix being a early to mid second round pick in this 24 class. And listen, I get it, man. The 24 class is great. It really is checking a ton of boxes. A lot of receivers with really good draft capital, some of them in great landing spots with quarterback play and vacated targets that are really appealing. But we got to get into the entirety of this situation, what we can expect, and how we can actually approach Michael Penix. But before we get into all that, you already know what time it is. I need you to stand up. Let's tuck them, man. Tuck them damn shirts in. Stop yapping. Let's talk about these dirty birds. All right, so let's get straight into this crazy conundrum of Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr. in Dynasty and what to really do with these guys. Now, I'm not really going to get into the NFL side of it and why Atlanta did this and try to defend it. That's not why I'm here, and honestly, I don't really care about that. I mean, it is crazy, and the reason this is so chaotic is we've never seen give a new quarterback in free agency a contract like Kirk Cousins got, and then also double down inside the top 10. Even if you go to Jordan Love and utilize him as an example, this guy's coming off the board at pick 26. It's a much different cost of acquisition, although it is still the first round, than a top 10 pick. Nobody saw it coming. But what I really want to do is get into the contract of Kirk Cousins. Let's take a look because they drafted Penix after they already knew what they did with Kirk Cousins. 4 years, $180 million. I think on the surface, going into the draft, we didn't expect them to take a quarterback. And when you think about that contract, it just sounds like, listen, they got their guy for the next 4 seasons. But when you take a look at this contract and how it's actually broken down, see, the NFL, where it's different from the NBA and other sports, the guarantees is really the most important and only thing that you should really focus on. Not saying that if you don't exceed expectations, you can't get non-guaranteed money, but that's really what the contract, for me, when I'm looking at it, actually speaks to. And when you take a look at Kirk Cousins, he signed a contract where, first of all, let's just acknowledge year 3 and year 4, Atlanta can get out of this with completely nothing as far as really having the cap hit. Let's take a look at 24 and 25, the first 2 years of the contract, where he is guaranteed to get $90 million from this contract. And this year, he's got a cap hit of 9.6% of the cap. And then next year, 15.4% of the cap. He's got a $25 million cap hit this year with a $40 million cap hit next year. Now, again, the cap continues to go up. So while that sounds like a ton of money, realistically, at the quarterback position, as far as what the cap will actually be hit from the Falcons side, it's not that crazy when you think about the fact that Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson, a lot of their really heavy skill players that we expect to take huge leaps in this offense, are under rookie contracts for the current moment while Kirk Cousins is getting this bag. It's not really a problem for how they're going to be moving and operating with their team, right? So when you go into this season, obviously the expectation is going to be that Kirk Cousins is the starter. Now, one really big thing to note, while he's guaranteed all this money, this $90 million is going to be guaranteed to him in these first 2 seasons, they actually have baked into his contract, if you cut him post June 1st, so if going into 2025. So after this season, in the summer, if they wait till after June 1st, that $40 million will still be dead money, but they won't have any negative cap hit in 2025 or beyond, any differently than they would if they moved on from him after 2025. So realistically, there's likely a scenario where if Kirk Cousins plays very well, 2 years is going to be probably the max in which he's going to play, unless he's completely superseding expectations and has this team as a Super Bowl contender, given the fact that they did draft Michael Penix as a top 8 pick. Now, before you start, biting my head off and telling me there's no way, they said they want to do what they did with Jordan Love, I'm just reading what the actual numbers say with the contract of Kirk Cousins, what they did with Michael Penix. Let's take a look though. Let's go back in time. Let's discuss some of these situations where we were sure that there's no way they're going to move on from a quarterback, when in reality, they moved on from these type of quarterbacks far, far sooner than we thought. and they were paid even higher than Kirk Cousins was. Now, the first one that comes to mind for me anyway is going to be Carson Wentz, when the Eagles just paid him in 2019, and then in 2020 drafted Jalen Hurts in round 2. Now, you may or may not remember, Carson Wentz was playing at an MVP level before he got hurt, and they gave Carson Wentz in 2019 the largest guaranteed contract in the NFL history at that time. Okay, so he actually got paid a little more than Russell Wilson did in that contract at that point, which was in Seattle. And Carson Wentz was 4 years, $128 million. Now, 2019 cap versus what we're looking at going into the 2024 season, significantly different. And of that 4 years, $128 million, over $107 million of that was guaranteed. So this was a huge contract. And at this point, while they won the Super Bowl with Carson Wentz getting hurt, Nick Foles stepped in for him. Carson Wentz was supposedly the franchise quarterback and was a young, promising quarterback that everybody thought was going to be a top 10 type player. Now, going into the 2020 draft, the team drafted Jalen Hurts in round 2. Obviously, that's nowhere near the same level of, draft pick that Michael Penix Jr. was at pick 8, or even that Jordan Love was at pick 26. But that raised a lot of eyebrows. Why are you using a second-round pick when you just basically bagged up your quarterback for the long haul? Now, think about this. Carson Wentz had money guaranteed for all 4 years of that contract. So, in this 2020 season, his contract was damn near fully guaranteed in 2021 and 2022 from the Philadelphia Eagles. And then with hindsight 2020, we already know basically Jalen Hurts became the starter in less than a full season. This team was terrible, went 4-11, and Carson Wentz was dealt to the Indianapolis Colts going into the 2021 season. So you can already point to that being one of the craziest scenarios that we've ever seen, and Jalen Hurts wasn't even given anywhere near the draft capital that Michael Penix was as a top 8 pick. And also the Eagles at the time had a much bigger piece of the pie guaranteed and stuck with Carson Wentz, and an investment was made, and they were able to get out of this crazy contract that no one saw the Eagles getting out of anytime soon within a single year of Jalen Hurts being drafted to be the backup for Carson Wentz. Now, a second one that comes to mind was when Alex Smith was the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Chiefs traded up to the number 10 pick to draft Patrick Mahomes. I know. Patrick Mahomes is looking like possibly in the realm of being the greatest quarterback of all time. He's on pace to certainly be in the conversation already. That's hindsight bias, though, right? At the time, Alex Smith, if you remember, they started 6-0. They ended up going 10-6 that year. They did lose in the first round of the playoffs to Tennessee, but he played very well. He was top 10 that season in both passing yards and passing touchdowns, while also having a league low 5 interceptions on the year. But after that, they went ahead and made sure that with a year left on Alex Smith's contract, they were making sure to make the pivot to Patrick Mahomes. They wanted more upside. And at the time, it was, not necessarily as clear and cut as it is today. Nobody at that point thought that Patrick Mahomes was going to be the best quarterback in the NFL, and certainly nobody saw him taking the league by storm and winning the MVP in 2018. Even with Alex Smith having this team in the playoffs, winning the division, that first round loss to Tennessee 22-21, they were already ready to pivot to Patrick Mahomes because of the level of investment they had in him in the NFL draft. Another one that comes to mind is definitely the 49ers with Trey Lance and Jimmy G. Now, hindsight bias, we actually know that Trey Lance basically is going to be one of the biggest busts we've ever seen. Ultimately, he didn't really end up playing that much for the Niners. Jimmy G, if you think about this, in 2019 when he was the starter for San Francisco, he took that team to the Super Bowl. They lost in the Super Bowl. 2020, he gets hurt, and without him, this team won like 6 games. They were a much worse team without Jimmy G. He comes back in 2021 and they go to the NFC title game. At that point, you had a history that says with Jimmy G, this team is a Super Bowl team or NFC title team. In the year that he got hurt, they didn't even make the playoffs. Obviously, Jimmy G meant a lot to that team as far as wins and losses, but they didn't believe that Jimmy G carried the upside necessary for them to actually capture that Super Bowl title. So in 2021, they lose in the NFC title game. Jimmy G was still pretty successful. Jimmy G now was under contract in 2022, and they basically held him hostage all the way until August. He ended up restructuring the contract, and they pivoted the team to Trey Lance and said that this is his team. Jimmy, we want you to be the backup in the 22 season. And then you want to talk about what no one sees coming. Brock Purdy taking this team far into the playoffs and winning almost every game that he started for them, all to become their franchise quarterback. They move on from Trey Lance, who they invested 3 first-round picks, and Jimmy G walked going into the 2023 season. Now, if we take a look at the ranges of outcomes, we got to at least touch on the fact that Kirk Cousins is injured, right? He's coming off of this Achilles. We don't know exactly how healthy he's going to be, how good he's going to look. And if there's any type of situation in the offseason where he gets hurt in the preseason, something like that, we have some situations to point to. Tony Romo comes to mind. Tony Romo, the quarterback for the Cowboys in 2016, they took Dak in the 4th round. At this point, when they drafted Dak, there was really no situation where they said Dak's going to overtake Tony Romo and be the starter. Dak Prescott was given a chance to take over the starting quarterback role, in which everybody assumed that once Romo was back healthy, he would be the starter. Dak took this team by storm. Him and Zeke, as rookies that year, were winning game after game. And after multiple games of winning in a row, it was basically a known thing that there's no way that the Cowboys can give the team back to Tony Romo. And Dak Prescott in the 4th round is going to be their long-term solution at the quarterback position. Tony Romo still had a bunch of money guaranteed on the books, but even after doing everything they could and having him retire after June 1st, they took on a $10.7 million cap hit in 2017, which is 9% of the team's cap, as well as an $8.9 million cap hit in 2018. So this did cost them, but they knew with Dak Prescott, they can't go back to the old quarterback ahead of them. Even though Tony Romo had some great years and was beloved by Cowboys fans at the time, this was Dak's team, and all that dead money did not stop them from going and giving the keys to Dak Prescott. And not nearly the same situation as Tyrod Taylor wasn't really viewed as a long-term quarterback solution, but Anthony Lynn at the time was very big on Tyrod Taylor and basically said he was going to be the starter. At that time, you got to remember, it was the COVID season, which was a lot harder of a transition for rookies. Anthony Lynn was not intending to start Justin Herbert, was considering redshirting him while he ended up giving Tyrod Taylor the keys for the team that year. Week 2, the team doctor has Tyrod Taylor's lung punctured. He's struggling to breathe. And each week after, Justin Herbert was clearly the franchise quarterback. And it wasn't anything but the injury in front of him that got him on the field quite as soon as he did. Given that Tyrod Taylor had to be hurt, and hurt so bad that he couldn't play in week 2 for Justin Herbert to start. It was not nearly as much money guaranteed to Matt Flynn. He was their big quarterback signing and free agency that offseason, and it was about 2 years of guaranteed money. But Russell Wilson, another 4th round pick, nobody saw coming, taking that job from day one and beating out Matt Flynn. Obviously, that situation's a little different because the money that they had tied up in Matt Flynn wasn't nearly as much, but Russell Wilson came out of the gates and defied the odds of beating out a quarterback which had millions of dollars at the time tied into him and Matt Flynn. Point is there that there's a range of outcomes in either potentially Michael Penix having looked so good in camp or an injury in front of him to Kirk Cousins where he gets on the field in year 1. That's not something that I predict to happen, but it's in the range of outcomes. And obviously all the ones we talked about prior to that where he sits year 1 and then gets on the field year 2. All right, so let's take a look and address Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris, kind of comparing this situation and what they're trying to do to what they did in Green Bay with Jordan Love and with Aaron Rodgers. And realistically, you can kind of go back and see the same thing that Green Bay did prior with Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. So going ahead and comparing that situation with Atlanta right now, let's take a look at the clear differences and kind of compare these two situations. So in 2020, Green Bay at the 26th overall pick, people are saying, all right, maybe they finally get Aaron Rodgers a weapon. He's been needing this. This is a team that was really good the year prior, and all really maybe Aaron needs is a first-round wide receiver, which they had not drafted at any point yet for him. He was so fired up, and this really lit a fire under his ass. I don't think people kind of remember exactly how it took place in that 2020 season after they drafted Jordan Love. And I don't even think it's arguable that this was the best season he had in his entire NFL career. So going into the 2020 season, after seeing what Green Bay just did and remembering that he was that to Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers has 48 touchdowns in this season, which is 5th all time in NFL history. The only quarterbacks that had more touchdowns than he did in that season, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, and Patrick Mahomes. While having 48 touchdowns, he only threw 5 picks. 5 picks to 48 touchdowns, simply unheard of in the NFL, had a 71% completion percentage. Literally, I don't think people understand. He was a 121.5 passer rating. This is one of the most efficient and best seasons a quarterback has ever strung together in the NFL. He was the MVP that year. They ended up losing in the NFC title game that season to Tampa Bay, coming into the final season, which ended up being what they called the last dance. Trying to copy the whole Chicago Bulls Michael Jordan thing. The Last Dance ends up with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. They have the best season in the NFC again, 13-4 record. The NFC has to go through Lambeau Field. They have a bye, but San Francisco comes in the first game and ends up knocking off Green Bay. They're done. That season's over, and then Davante Adams leaves the team. So now just understand this. Aaron Rodgers had them as the best record in the NFC 2 years in a row, and really you could argue the favorite to at least get to the Super Bowl, if not possibly win, especially that last season. Now ultimately they underwhelmed as far as winning in the playoffs, but at that point there's nothing with Aaron Rodgers in those 2 seasons which suggests that he's anything other than arguably still the best quarterback in the NFL, given all that. Davante Adams ends up leaving, going to play with his college teammate, Derek Carr, as you know, in Vegas. So going into the 2022 season, Aaron Rodgers loses Davante Adams, but he's playing so well these last 2 years. Nobody really saw him taking such a step backwards in that 2022 season that he did. Definitely the weapons around him were nowhere near the same with Davante Adams out of town, and they end up underwhelming. They're 8-9, and at that point, finally feel like they're going to go ahead and separate, part ways from Aaron Rodgers after 3 seasons. He goes to the Jets, and they're going to give Jordan Love a chance at taking over the starting role. Looking at that historically, you're talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer as well as a 26 overall pick, and at that point, there was some question on if they're even going to ever give this kid the keys because Aaron Rodgers was playing so out of his mind, and this is a guy that is extremely talented, and right now the Jets still believe in after coming off an Achilles at 41 years old. Which now comparatively, let's take a look at this situation with Atlanta. And listen, Atlanta has these skill players that we like, right? Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. We as a dynasty community and fantasy community, we are begging for quarterback play to improve because we want to see these weapons unleashed. So bringing in Kirk Cousins, while for the NFL side it's a little more questionable, we're just excited because this quarterback play, it can't be any worse than whoever the hell they've been throwing out there at quarterback, and we finally have a chance to unleash London, Pitts, and Bijan. Arthur Smith's out of town. We're really excited, and we kind of just feel like, okay, Kirk Cousins makes sense to be the quarterback of the future. But if you think about it from a team perspective standpoint, from Atlanta, the Falcons team, right? Kirk Cousins, at this point, he's going on year 36. And he's made the playoffs all of 4 times. In the playoffs, he has a 1-4 record in the playoffs. So while Kirk Cousins definitely is going to improve this Atlanta Falcons team and going to make them a playoff contender and possibly win the division, he is far from a sure thing as far as the Falcons actually getting to a high-level contender based on the fact that he's played with Justin Jefferson. He's played in Minnesota for years. We saw what he was in Washington, and he has 1 playoff win to show for it. And in 8 full seasons as a starter, has only made the playoffs in 4 of those seasons. Right now, Kirk Cousins, while he's an upgrade for the skill players, he's not a lock to be, the savior for Atlanta to really help push them back into like Matt Ryan had them in 2016 and 2017. And given what we see in the contract, as well as the fact that Kirk Cousins is not anywhere near a first ballot Hall of Famer and realistically may not actually get this team to the playoffs. Comparatively, right? Green Bay Packers, every single year with Aaron Rodgers, were leading and winning the NFC and one of the favorites to go to the Super Bowl. Right now with Atlanta, I think there's a realistic chance that you can say, yeah, this team could end up being the division winner, certainly. Although Tampa Bay just brought back Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They have a lot of the same nucleus that they did last year. It's not even a lock that they win the division, but certainly I don't think it'd be safe to say that this is a team that's anywhere near locking up a bye or getting to, one of the 1 or 2 seeds in this NFC, with the 49ers still looking to be dominant. You have Detroit, you have the rise of Green Bay, you have Dallas, who was very good last year. This NFC is very, very strong at the top. Not to mention Philadelphia had a great draft. We'll see if they can fix what they did in the back end to have a horrible finish, but that's a team that's still loaded with a ton of talent. And to say that Atlanta is going to be one of the front runners in the NFC, I think would be crazy. I do think that they can make the playoffs, but the reason I say that, if they go into a wild card game and Kirk Cousins underwhelm, and now Kirk Cousins' playoff resume is 1-5 going into his second year, and they can get out of this contract and they can move on to Michael Penix and just say, all right, we saw what Kirk Cousins can be. We do see that this team is talented enough, but we think Michael Penix is the quarterback that's going to help lead us to the future. There's a scenario where Michael Penix going into year 2 is the starter day 1. And if you take a look, what I want to do here is go over top 10 picks since 2010 and see how long it's taken these guys to actually get on the field. So in 2023, you got Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and A-Rich, as you probably remember. All these guys were actually day 1 starters. So then you got Trevor Lawrence at 1, Zach Wilson at 2, Trey Lance at 3 in the 2021 class. T-Law and Zach Wilson were actually day 1 starters, and Trey Lance, as we talked about, going into year 2, he was the day 1 starter, and Shanahan in San Francisco made it very clear that he's the quarterback of the future going into that season. Joe Burrow was the week 1 starter. Tua Tagovailoa at pick 5 was the week 8 starter. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, for the first 6 weeks of the season going into the bye week, had this team playing really well, and it was kind of a surprising move to see them pivot away from Ryan Fitzpatrick and go to Tua Tagovailoa in week 8. Justin Herbert, obviously at this point, we talked about, Anthony Lynn talked about possibly redshirting Justin Herbert, but it took the punctured lung of Tyrod Taylor to actually step him on the field as the starter in week 2. 2019, Kyler Murray, the first pick overall with Cliff Kingsbury. He was a day 1 starter. And then Daniel Jones was taking over for Eli Manning. Eli Manning was certainly nowhere near as good as he once was in years past for the Giants, but they moved on from him and gave Daniel Jones the keys in week 3. He was the 6th overall pick. Coming out of Duke, kind of a head-scratching pick, frankly, similar to Michael Penix Jr. Nobody really saw him going that high in the NFL draft. Baker Mayfield, the 1st overall pick, was the starter by week 4 for that team. Sam Darnold was the day 1 starter for them in his rookie season. Josh Allen ended up getting the start week 2 for the Bills. He was the 7th overall pick. And then Josh Rosen, the 10th overall pick for the Cardinals. He got the start by week 4. That team was so bad. Obviously, they ended up making the pick number 1 overall for Kyler Murray, but he was given plenty of chances to start. He started week 4. 2017 now. Mitch Trubisky, he ended up getting the reins and was starting by week 5. Patrick Mahomes, as we talked about, year 2, he was the day 1 starter. 2016, Jared Goff, you may remember Jeff Fisher was there, finally gave him the start in week 10. And then Carson Wentz was the day 1 starter in his rookie season. 2015, both Winston and Mariota were the week 1 starters. 2014, Blake Bortles took him till week 4, but he eventually was the starter by week 4. 2013, there's no top 10 picks at the quarterback position. 2012, you've got Andrew Luck in week 1, RG3 in week 1. They were the number 1 and number 2 overall picks. Ryan Tannehill, actually the 8th overall pick, just like Penix. He actually started week 1, and then go to 2011 with Cam Newton as the week 1 opening day starter. Jake Locker, and for him, it took him until year 2 to be the day 1 starter as well. Blaine Gabbert, the 10th overall pick, was the week 3 starter for that team in 2011. That's a sample size from 2011 to 2023, where if someone's drafted inside the top 10, like Michael Penix was, not like Jordan Love, where he was drafted at 26 overall, all those players combined, you can say the circumstances are different than with Kirk Cousins or not, but all these players saw the field and was the starter by at least day 1 and going into their 2nd season. None of these players sat for 2 full seasons. And right now, people are out here projecting that Michael Penix is going to possibly sit for 3 full seasons. Really, there's nothing that we can point to with the contract of Kirk Cousins, as well as any of historical data that says, yeah, it's likely that that's what they're going to do, other than the fact that they say they're kind of trying to copy the Green Bay situation, but nothing points to the fact that Michael Penix is going to sit for 3 years. All right, so when we take a look at southharmonff.com/ADP, you click on Superflex-Rookie. These are all rookie drafts, and this ADP has been filtered to only update since the NFL draft has taken place. So this is after round 1 of the NFL draft, starting Friday, going all the way to current right now, Thursday, early in the morning on May 2nd. So Caleb Williams is the 101 with all these drafts in the books. Then you got Marvin Harrison at 102, Jaden Daniels at the 103, Malik Nabers at the 104, Roma Dunze at the 105, Drake May at the 106, JJ McCarthy 107. Brock Bowers coming in at the 108, 109 Xavier Worthy, 110 Brian Thomas, 111 Ladd McConkey out of the Chargers. You got the 112 Jonathan Brooks, 201 is Bo Nix coming in at quarterback 5, Keon Coleman the 202 going to Buffalo, and then you have at the 203 Trey Benson, before finally, based on ADP and thousands of drafts at this point, Michael Penix is coming off the board at the 204 at quarterback 6. This is where I think it's important to talk about this from a standpoint of a few different things for this draft, okay? One thing that people are like seemingly unwilling to do at this point, and kind of amazes me considering we're playing for the long haul in Dynasty, is of any sort of fucking patience. At this point, what's certain is not exactly how long it's going to take until Penix becomes the starter for the Falcons. It's just a matter of when that actually is. Concretely, we can say for certain that at some point he is going to be the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. The 3-year thing, I think we can honestly throw out the window. I don't think there's any chance that that's the case unless Kirk Cousins supersedes expectations so much where maybe they go to the NFC title game. He has this team winning a ton of games. At that point, and only that point, I think, could we say Michael Penix is going to be reserved to not start until something like year 4. Given the way that the contract is structured around Kirk Cousins. The fact that they drafted Penix, where they could have used that pick on the defensive side of the ball, they could have taken another skill player like Roma Dunze to surround Kirk Cousins with more weapons. The fact that they sunk that into Penix probably doesn't bode well for Kirk Cousins actually getting this team into, getting a bye or becoming the road having to come through Atlanta for a couple games. So it's kind of set up, I think, for the 2 years to likely be the high-end range of outcomes where Kirk Cousins is the starter for 2 full seasons. Now, while that wouldn't necessarily be ideal, what we can say is through all that time, Kirk Cousins has to stay healthy and has to be playing at a high enough level to where they're saying Michael Penix definitely is not going to get on the field. And at At that point, Michael Penix then would become the biggest outlier that we've ever seen for a draft pick in the top 10. So even if you say that, somewhere in that range of 2 full seasons, whether he sits the entirety or not, Michael Penix Jr. is the only person being drafted in this range, and honestly, you could just say in this class in general, which is value insulated. Now, what I mean by that is everybody else is going to get on the field at some point. And while there is a chance for rise in value, there's also a chance for value to fall. While you could sit here and say Michael Penix is going to fall a little bit throughout the time of him sitting, there's probably some truth to that. But there's a couple questions about what is diamond handing. And diamond handing actually refers to cryptocurrency. And basically, you're going to hold at all costs. If you draft Michael Penix, you've got to diamond hand him. And what I mean by that is if you draft Michael Penix with the idea that he's going to start within year 1 and then 6 weeks in, 8 weeks in, you're going to want to trade him because he's not doing anything for you and you feel like he's burning a hole in your pocket, do not draft Michael Penix because that is a cause for loss. You are going to end up trading Michael Penix away at a discount by doing that. But if you don't do that, if you draft Michael Penix and you use him kind of as currency, he's not going to actually be able to go into your lineup until he's announced the starter. But the moment that Michael Penix is announced the starter for Atlanta, whenever that actually is, and they're moving on from Kirk Cousins and giving the keys to Penix, Penix is going to have a surge in value. And at that point, take a look at like what Will Levis had when he went into the starting role for the Tennessee Titans after they moved on from Ryan Tannehill. He ended up having a huge game, but even before that, he had a value surge. That's a guy with second round draft capital. Michael Penix is attached to top 10 draft capital. And look at right now, one thing that I think is very interesting is J.J. McCarthy, whether you like him or don't, and while many people say that he's a better prospect than Michael Penix, and I'm not here to disagree with that, the reason he's getting such a benefit of the doubt when we look at where he's going in drafts and where his value is we say, okay, going into this situation, got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, while not healthy right now, will eventually be healthy at some point, maybe even by his second season. So we love the situation he's going into. That's going to push him up the board. Him and Drake May are going back and forth. Sometimes you see May go ahead, sometimes you see McCarthy go ahead, where a lot of people think that May may be more talented than McCarthy. They don't like the New England landing spot. But think about it with Penix again. Penix is going at the 204, and what do we know? When he does become the starter, Drake London's there, Kyle Pitts is there, Bijan Robinson's there, and who knows, they may even add more to this team at some point before he becomes the starter. This is a great situation for a young quarterback to go into. Why are we not giving him the same benefit of the doubt just because he's not going to play week 1? And then we got to talk about not just that. What are the players that are being drafted ahead of Michael Penix? The reality is I think most people are going to say, well, Michael Penix Jr. isn't going to help my team win, and right now I'm just a piece or two away from really making my team that much better, or I want somebody that's going to help be an impact player for my team in Dynasty. And I think right here is where we have to have a serious conversation about the reality of what an impact player for your team looks like. And realistically, it's not going to fucking be all these rookies that we're taking here. And I like a lot of them, right? I like this class a good bit. But if you think that young rookies, especially with profiles that have holes in them, not talking about the ones that are clearly going ahead of where Penix should be going, okay? So Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, these are special talents. I'm not arguing, and no one should be, that Penix should be going ahead of those type of receivers. I wouldn't even argue that he should be going ahead of the quarterbacks like McCarthy, May, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams. Really where the problem becomes is probably after Bowers. We start talking about Xavier Worthy. We start talking about Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, and even the running backs of Jonathan Brooks, who's coming off an ACL. And while he's young and I think a very talented running back, he's nowhere near a Gibbs or a Bijan Robinson. He's not a special talent. And if he ended up being not a huge difference maker, that wouldn't be a surprise. Trey Benson, we love the situation in Arizona. Is he going to take it from James Conner right away? Like, how meaningful will any of these players be? And what I want to do, especially with the wide receivers, because I do like Ladd McConkey, I do like Xavier Worthy, I do like Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman. I think it's important to go take a look at, while I do like all these guys, what's the realistic outcome of these players being impact difference makers for your team in their rookie season. So let's go over the last 3 seasons. And what I want to do, 23, 2022, and 2021, take a look at the wide receiver finishes for all the rookies. All these guys were really excited about at some point, and actually see what they did and where they finished for the season in their rookie year. So in 2023, in the order of which they were drafted by ADP, JSN finished at wide receiver 48. Quentin Johnson, second receiver off the board, wide receiver 74. Zay Flowers, the wide receiver 31. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 23 last year. Jonathan Mingo, Mingo, wide receiver 81, Jaden Reed, wide receiver 25, Rashee Rice, wide receiver 27, Marvin Mims, wide receiver 88, and Josh Downs was the wide receiver 43. All in total, when you think about that entire class, you had 1 wide receiver 2, 3 wide receiver 3s, and 2 wide receiver 4s. All right. Then you go to 2022. Treylon Burks, wide receiver 78. Drake London, wide receiver 32. Garrett Wilson was the wide receiver 21. Sky Moore, wide receiver 121. Chris Olave, wide receiver 26. Dotson, wide receiver 51. J-Mo, even if we give him the points per game benefit because of all the time he missed, on a points per game basis, wide receiver 143 in his rookie season. George Pickens, wide receiver 40. Christian Watson, wide receiver 41. David Bell, 122, wide receiver, and then there was Alec Pierce, wide receiver 64. Going to 2021, we got Jamar Chase, who was finishing at the wide receiver 5 in fantasy that season. Really good. You had then Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 13. Devontae Smith was wide receiver 30 in fantasy that year. Rondale Moore, wide receiver 63. Bateman, wide receiver 71. Elijah Moore, wide receiver 49. Terrace Marshall, 139. Eskridge was 143. Kadarius Toney, wide receiver 90. Amari Rodgers, 180. There was 179 receivers better than Amari Rodgers, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown to round out round 2 was wide receiver 21. Now, these are the wide receivers which were drafted in the first 2 rounds of their rookie drafts in ADP that year. 2021, even if we think this class is more similar to what that was, that class had 1 wide receiver 1, 2 wide receiver 2s, and a wide receiver 3. The 2022 season had 1 wide receiver 2, 2 wide receiver 3s, and 2 wide receiver 4s. And then obviously 2023 again, 1 wide receiver 2, 3 wide receiver 3s, and 2 wide receiver 4s. Here's what I'm trying to say, okay? If you want to say that Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze, those are different type of wide receiver prospects, and you think that they have a chance to actually finish as wide receiver 1, or probably more like all of them making the wide receiver 2 list, fine. No problem with that. And I think all of them have a chance to be difference makers. Then, as soon as we start getting to Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Xavier Worthy, certainly like Adonai Mitchell, Ricky Pearsall, any of these guys, it's not that I don't think that there's a path for them to be, a solid rookie wide receiver and that they can't even increase in value a little bit. But what's the reality? If you're telling me that you're passing on Michael Penix Jr. right now because you think you need to have someone that's going to play right away and is going to help your team be a little bit closer to a playoff team, the reality is that's probably not the process. And that doesn't actually make sense as far as being a true producer. Now, if you end up wanting to draft a wide receiver that's a young, talented rookie, and you think you can pivot that into a positional playmaker that's a lot more secure as a veteran, that's going to give you a realistic top 20 type season, it's a little different conversation. But at the end of the day, the point is all those type of profiles that we're drafting right now ahead of Michael Penix Jr., I can tell you one thing. While there is certainly a chance in value bump and maybe you can sell for a profit, there's also a chance that some of these guys start really slow or underwhelm and ultimately not only aren't contributing to your team in a positive way in production, but are actually hurting you and they're starting to bleed value. One thing that's certain, Michael Penix Jr. is basically going to stay even keel, and even if his value dips for a little bit artificially, if you're going to diamond hand it and hold him, at some point, he is going to take over the starting quarterback position for the Atlanta Falcons and is going to be surrounded by a ton of playmakers. Just think about it this way in its root elementary form, okay? If you were able to use a second-round pick and draft it, and you had to hold it, you basically said, listen, you're going to get interest on this, though. It basically has to go into a time vault, and this second-round pick in a year or 2 years is going to turn into at least a minimum of a late first value and possibly more that you also can insert into your lineup in a Superflex league at a scarce position. Who the hell is not signing up for that? And if you don't want to sign up for that, you got to at least ask yourself why. Why are you being so bullish on having to have production right at this moment? You're basically going to have impatience causing you more harm than good. And the fact that right now I can tell you that you can take Michael Penix Jr. in the second round and honestly getting very close to the mid part of the second round in Superflex drafts, and all you have to do is practice a little patience, and at some point it's guaranteed to pay off in a value surge, whether you want to hold him and actually see if he's going to be a quarterback that can mean something for you in your Superflex spot as a quarterback 2 or 3, or at that point you want to try to sell. Don't allow impatience to be the reason that you don't grab a big time value, and whether we like it or not for the NFL side and for Atlanta, he is going to have a value bump coming and is certainly protected with value insulation as long as you don't sell when you are impatient that he's not on the field. That's all I got. Let me know what you think of it. Give me all the comments and yell at me. I think this one's going to be a very entertaining and polarizing one. I want to hear it all in the comments. I'll see you back here, same time, same place, next week, talking more Dynasty strategy and trades. I'm out of this thing. Peace.